In another rebuke to President Trump, the House will soon be voting on a bill to provide new military aid to Ukraine after 6 Republicans joined Democrats on Wednesday to force the legislation to the floor. The bill, which would provide $8 billion in military financing loans to Ukraine, among other provisions, marks the first major attempt by Congress to give aid to Ukraine since President Trump began his second term. It comes as both Russia and Ukraine have escalated aerial attacks on each other's territory, with Russia launching hundreds of drones and dozens of missiles against Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities earlier this week, and Kyiv attacking deep into Russia, hitting an oil depot in the city of St. Petersburg ahead of President Putin's annual economic conference there. President Trump just moments ago suggesting peace talks could resume between the countries after President Putin said he'd be willing to make compromises if Ukraine does the same.
President Putin said today that he was willing to make compromises that you requested to end the war with Ukraine if Ukraine was willing to make similar compromises. Yeah. What were the compromises that you asked Putin to make?
Well, I'd rather not say, because Peter asked me. I think it was meant as a little wise guy question, but I'm not sure. But I'm very responsible when that happens. It's going to happen. They're going to both make compromises. I suggested those compromises. And, we've had a lot to do with it. We'd love to see they're two very good people. They're two very, incredible countries, beautiful countries. They've got to stop.
And joining me now is Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Olga Stefanishyna. I want to start just with what we heard from President Trump. He suggested that President Zelenskyy and President Putin could soon meet. Is that something you feel is realistic?
Hello, Monica. Thank you for having me here on air. This presumption comes out of the just hours ago released open letter of President Zelenskyy to President Putin and potentially the Russian people, where he actually underscores the consequences of the nearly half of the President Putin's term in the aggression with Ukraine, and he suggests to have a meeting and to have the discussion between Ukraine and Russia. And this is something the President Trump is aware of and was commenting right away in the White House right now.
And President Putin also told reporters today that he was ready to make some compromises for a peace deal at the request of President Trump, provided Ukraine do the same. We have heard some similar language before, but do you see this as an opening for these peace talks to really start up again in earnest?
Well, definitely, if there was a desire to negotiate or make compromises, there was literally zero obstacles to that. Ukraine has been demonstrating in its openness and flexibility in terms of whatever format was suggesting, including by the U.S. president, to facilitate the talks. But it's actually not something that evolved in the real outcome, because basically there has never been a real intention on the aggressor side. And I think that the letter, which has been released by President Zelenskyy, and the very fact that Ukraine and ending the war in Ukraine remains one of the key priorities of this administration, gives a new wind of opportunity to the process. And actually the capabilities of Ukraine to deprive Russia from the ability to attack Ukrainian citizens, kill more Ukrainian people and families, they really become very well heard and seen and faced by the Russia on their territory. And I think that's another element of pressure that forced Putin to come back and seek for the other option of the dialogue.
And I want to turn to Ukraine's increased drone attacks against Russia, including on that oil depot that we mentioned in St. Petersburg. What is the strategy behind these kinds of attacks?
This is absolutely, if we would be a military people with you, this would really not be a question to us, because basically first, Ukraine deprives Russian Federation from the fuel of war, which is actually the fuel, but also the capabilities which allow Russia to benefit from the waivers of sanctions, to benefit from the sale of their products abroad, and gaining the resources and the financial financial capabilities to finance the war and continue the aggression. The other priority actions Ukraine is taking on the Russian territory is depriving Russia from the military capabilities which enable Russian attacks into the territory of Ukraine. I just need to name you, to give you a couple of numbers. Just over the last 2 weeks, Russia attacked Ukraine with 2,700 drones and 1,500 guided missiles. Every successful attack of Ukraine on the military targets in the Russian Federation decreases the capabilities of the Russia to attack Ukraine, to have the bombs on Ukrainian cities, on the kindergartens and the schools. Over the last night, there were like 4 hospitals were directly targeted by Russian bombs. And the more successful Ukraine in deep strikes on the Russian territory, the more safer Ukrainian people are.
And so, Ambassador, does Ukraine intend to strike deeper into Russia then? Is that what you're saying? Is any Russian city specifically off limits?
Well, we're not in a priority of targeting the cities. We're just targeting something that enables Russian aggression. And as long as this aggression is lasting, we will use every possible option to defend ourselves, to defend our people. And we are not able to watch our kids dying, our families being deprived of their homes. And this is the very effective mean of making sure that we can save our cities. And again, we have making a step towards the dialogue. The president of Ukraine has openly published a letter and sent it formally to the criminal leader of the Russian Federation killing Ukrainian people. And I think this is a step towards the dialogue. This is where we should make sure that we can stop any aggression, be it launched by Russian Federation or anybody by dialogue.
And I want to play something for you that Secretary Rubio told Congress this week. Let's listen to that.
We remain ready to play any role we can in that context of bringing a peace about, because we think the war in Ukraine, devastating war, has no military solution. It can only be solved through a diplomatic route, and it's been unfruitful.
Do you agree that this war cannot be solved on the battlefield?
Absolutely. It has been already proven a million times. And actually, if you would just trace the public statements of the Russian president, even those he was giving to President Trump over the phone calls, he never reached any military objective, even publicly declared not speaking about the militarily when. And I would highly agree with Secretary Rubio that this war is devastating. And this is devastating first and foremost for Ukrainian people. This aggression which should have never been started. This is attacks which should have never been faced. And this is a generation of Ukrainians. We should never remember the war. But the war is there, and diplomatic efforts and U.S. clear leadership on that is something where we see the pathway. And we hope that the renewed momentum created at this point will help the U.S. government to find innovative ways to facilitate the diplomatic efforts.
And in the final moments we have left, the White House and much of the world has been focused on the war with Iran. Do you feel that Ukraine has been forgotten because of that?
Absolutely not. I can assure you that even throughout all the period of time when the operation has been started in Iran, the continued dialogue between the American envoys and negotiators was taking place with Ukrainian delegation. We had a number of exchanges of the prisoners of war, and we had a so-called ceasefire on the 9th of May, which enabled Russian leader to have a small parade on the Red Square. So there are so many things which has happened throughout this time. But unfortunately, we're so far yet from seeing the war coming to an end. And I'm sure that there is a way to continue this dialogue. But although there is not too much on the headlines, I can assure you that as the ambassador, I have the understanding that Ukraine remains a priority.
Ambassador Stefanishyna, thank you for your time.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.